How did you get to New York? What's that story?
I almost moved to Berlin.
Really?
It was after grad school, and I had a fellowship in Berlin between my second and third year of grad school, and I fell in love with the theater that was happening in Berlin at the time, 2015. And I couldn't decide because I had an offer from an agency here when I graduated in 2016. Berlin, New York, Berlin, New York. There was no real roadmap to go to Europe. And I'd never done New York. I lived in LA before grad school. And I thought that, well, Berlin will always be there, probably. And so will New York. But I've never done the thing. I did the thing in LA before I had really any training. And I arrived around this time of year, 9 years ago.
What is attractive about the Berlin scene? What do people not know about what's going on out there?
You know, because everybody, it's like a cliche, like in New York, you know, Brooklyn people talking about Berlin and how cool it is. And like, yeah, Berghain's great and everything. But the theater there, it's as if, you know, really, it's like really, really, really well produced, like Broadway level experimental theater. If you can imagine what that's like.
Yeah.
Every theater has a set company, and they do plays in rep. They'll bring back plays for several weeks or several days per year that they've been doing sometimes for 10 to 15 years. So you could virtually see a different play between the 4 or 5 main theaters in Berlin every night of the week for the rest of your life, because it's always rotating. And they have these massive, you know, warehouses where they store these sets. And so everything's always shifting and changing. You know, for 5 days, they'll do Faust, and for these other days they'll do Hamlet or something new. And the scale and style, of course, very influenced by Brecht, very irreverent, very unapologetic, not very precious, and the acting is so good.
Do you need to speak German to go over there and do that?
No. The more naturalistic, the few naturalistic and or realistic productions you may encounter, it not knowing German might get in the way, but the work is so evocative that it transcended language for me. You know,
I'd love to know who you were before that moment. Were you always an actor? Was this always something you knew you wanted to do?
I went to college to be a filmmaker. It was my criteria for choosing schools. I went to this incredible arts high school for fuck-ups in Massachusetts. And shout out to the Cambridge School of Weston. And, you know, I had, you know, that was very much like a liberal arts education at, you know, 16, 17, 18. And so I wanted to specialize in something. And I was captured by the notion of filmmaking. And that was my criteria for choosing schools. And it was my first year at Hampshire where you could edit on a flatbed and shoot on 16 millimeter and get your film developed and, you know, use tape to literally edit and splice your film. And I got into experimental film, like what they call handmade films. I thought it would be narrative, but I got really into handmade films, you know, building these sculptures out of film itself and projecting it and seeing what happens. But then I got cast in this play, and I'd done plays in high school to sort of feed this plan I have of being this film director. Like, oh, I have to understand acting in order to do this. And so maybe I'll take this acting class my first year of college because like I have this whole grand scheme of like being a filmmaker. And I was cast in this play middle of my first year called Cloud 9 by Carol Churchill. And that was the moment.
How did you know?
So in the US, we're really, for the most part, exposed to acting through film and TV. And there's nothing wrong with that, but in the rest of the world, theater tends to be more affordable and you are exposed to it earlier on, more frequently. And the notion of theater acting was not something wasn't really in my system. I mean, of course I'd seen plays growing up outside Boston, whatever. But in America, it's like film and television are, for the most part, is like our medium. And so that's the craft of acting is that school is most familiar to us. So I thought that's what just acting was, you know. I didn't think it could be this I didn't think it could be what I discovered it could be, which was broad and larger than life. The first act is a farce set in colonial Africa. And I played the native black slave. And it's specified in the text that it's played by a white actor, not in blackface, because the idea is to sort of show the absurdity of identity. It was written in the 70s. You could kind of do that then.
Yeah.
And I worked with, a dialect I worked with a friend who was from Kenya who worked as my dialect coach. And I didn't know that could be acting. Like acting could be sculptural.
Yeah.
And exist broadly in space and be physically demanding. Like I fell in love with the sort of the physical. I was always really bad at sports as a kid, but I love to be physical. I love to move, and I'm in my body, and this felt like I could reclaim interior and exterior space through story.
Through that experience, did you immediately realize you wanted to change course and devote yourself to acting, or did that take a while to give up the filmmaking component?
No, immediately. I think I was a little too, I was 18. I was a little too influenced by others. I got a lot of attention for this show. It was a well put together production. And all the work at that school is very student driven. But that was also a good thing. People were like, "Oh, you're great at this. You should continue this." And making films was something I liked, but it felt very isolating and tedious. And acting is tedious too. But it felt like the right course correction, course change. And of course, it's all like up and down from there.
Yeah.
You think that every experience is going to be as good. And sometimes it is, or better. But most of the time, it's a whole rainbow of colors.
Yeah. When you first got here to the city, did you already have a network that you could plug yourself into? What did you do when you got to New York? Did you already have work lined up?
There were some people I knew from before grad school. It's funny. Most of the people I knew have left, either during the pandemic or shortly thereafter. I did have a network. There's a playwright I worked with in college who I loved. And she moved to LA. And I really responded to her work, but she was making a bit of a transition to writing novels. There wasn't a real cohesive sense of community that came out of my particular class of actors in grad school. Sometimes it sort of coheres and everybody creates a company and you make stuff together. And ours, we all got along. We kind of lost touch, with respect, I think. So I struggled 2018, 19 with that. Not entirely, but I'm realizing that's what keeps this going is having a community. And then people use the word network. I just don't like that word. I don't know. It feels very cold to me.
Yeah. Very corporate.
Yeah. It feels like something, you'd hear out of it. You need like a power presentation would necessitate the use of that word.
Yeah. Yeah. What was your confidence level when you first got to New York? It sounds like you got some very good feedback from that role you were just mentioning, but did you believe I'm an actor? This is what I do. Where was your head when you first got here?
I was entitled. Yeah. I wanted things to happen a lot faster than I did, and I wasn't willing to put the work in. And that's okay, and I see why that was. And I had to unlearn and relearn and let everything I learned in drama school fall into place over the course of a couple of years, which isn't to say that I didn't know what I was doing, but there was a level of entitlement and I don't want to say laziness, but you can't really control your career. And a lot of actors, or at least I thought that I could, and plan. And you can have goals, of course, but things just happen. Great things happen. Shitty things happen. And of course, that entire time I was regretting that I hadn't moved to Berlin for those years. Because facing the reality of what it is to be a New York actor is daunting, and it takes like at least 2 years to get used to living here.
What is that reality of being an actor first moving here? What was it like for you?
I was auditioning a lot, and I think I got way too attached to results. Whether there were results in my head or the results that I was yearning for. It was very confusing. Like, how do you make money, right? And I was almost foolishly, I'm kind of embarrassed about the stretch of 3 years. It's kind of between 2016 to the late 19, and the pandemic happened. I sometimes feel like I prioritize my catering job more than some of these auditions. And, I got some gigs, and I was grateful for that, when that hit. But the economics are it's such a reality. It's expensive. It's expensive to do anything. How do I make this happen? So it was very confusing. And I think now you just have to have your hands in many pots, and I have to be with people, I can't spread myself too thin. I can't think that something is going to work out the way I imagine it to. I just have to I have to arrive. I have to be available to it. I have to put the time in and the care and the attention and listen to people and let the results just sort of happen.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Or is that kind of
it does. I would imagine it was both confusing and fucking hard.
It was really hard. It was, you mean like right after school? Like
just the reality of living in this place as a working artist, as a working actor, making that happen just sheerly economically. I would love, in whatever detail you'd like to share, to talk about how you made that work for you, because I would imagine that a lot of people that might come across this are interested in moving here.
Oh yeah.
And they want to learn from examples of how is it that people make it work. I mean,
there's two broad chapters to this. There's the sort of pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic, inevitably.
Yeah.
And I wasn't happy before the pandemic. I was not living in any sense of truth as an artist. I felt like I was just pounding the pavement and doing what everybody else did, because that's the way it's supposed to be done. But yeah, my rent was low at the time. I lived with several friends from grad school, so there was that community that I had. But yeah, I was working maybe 30 to 40 hours a week, bartending, with multiple catering companies, and which actually was kind of fun, because I got to kind of like experience the city, and I had like catering friends, and I had grad school friends and friends from before, it was an interesting exposure. I keep putting off like writing a bit of like some sort of memoir about my years, like, catering during the Trump era, like, going out to the Hamptons, you just sort of like, you get like an experience of like what, like you go everywhere and you meet and you see all these people, and you're, at first it was kind of fun, and like, oh, I'm getting paid like not terribly for this. And, there's some time to fuck around. But that's how I supported myself. And then I started getting some TV jobs, and that helped. And yeah. And it was really like, I had no real set schedule. Yeah. Like I didn't, like, and people who have a 9 to 5, that's like, even still, like that's kind of a mystery to me. Like, it sounds great, but
What did you notice at the catering jobs? I'm curious, in all those venues in New York, what you remember witnessing there.
It's so funny. This is not what I expected to talk about today, like at all. Human nature.
Yeah.
Fascinating studies of behavior, wealth, but like being intimately involved in wealth, like being in people's closets and people's bathrooms, and working these crazy. LL Cool J's daughter's wedding was one of the best.
Whoa!
Shout out to LL.
Wow,
that was one of the best events. It was. Everybody was super nice. It was well staffed. Yeah, the whole thing is a performance. Like, it's like the event in and of itself. It's like guests at events don't really care about how fussily something is presented, but but like the event planners always want something presented in a way.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry I didn't, and they're like, I don't care. So there's like a theater to these events, this event industry that I still sort of find somewhat fascinating. Betsy DeVos's niece's wedding flew us out to Bay Harbor, Michigan.
Wow.
On a chartered plane, put us up and paid us a per diem. That was crazy. Yeah. And then it got old.
Yeah, I would imagine.
And I'm like older now and my knees don't work as well. And it's like, I could be teaching acting and not serving people drinks or canapé.
And it sounds like around that time you said you were getting TV roles.
Yeah.
As well. How did that come about? Did you have an agent? Did you seek that out yourself? How did you make that happen?
We did like a showcase after grad school, which was one of the worst experiences in my entire life. But I did get an agent from it. And she would send me out for, TV parts, regional theater. And I went in for this role in Blue Bloods, which I think is ending or maybe just ended. And like a Russian thug type who is actually a caterer at a Russian club. And I started going out for a lot of like Russian parts because I can do accents pretty well. I mean, a Russian would probably find my accent abhorrent, but my American friends find it passable. Because you're like, where in Russia is that? It's like, oh, generic. Oh, that's just generic. So, but yeah, that was fun. I mean, and I got to work with Donnie Wahlberg and was in like the interrogation hall with him. And that was actually my first real job as like acting gig. I'd done some small projects up until that. And it was, I think maybe almost a year out, I was auditioning a lot and then I got that and it was 2 days, but I got paid the weekly, which was cool. And I think I realized like I made the mistake of giving them consistency in the takes. I didn't realize that till after the fact. When you're in theater, you're trained to just be consistent for the most part, night to night. I mean, you legally, like not legally, but literally, if you're in a Broadway play, you have to just like be as absolutely consistent as possible. Timing, gesture, everything. We can get away with a little bit more in the off Broadway scene, but yeah, like the muscle of acting is like, oh, delivery, go deeper, but go, and for TV, they want to see choices. They want to see a variety of things. Because it really is a conversation between you and the editor wants options. So give them options rather than give them the same thing. But it was exciting. I mean, it was amazing to see how television operates as a machine. And when you're acting in a play, you get more attention. Because you're carrying the story. But on a television show, it's like, yeah, you're like basically another camera. You're just like a piece of equipment, as you should be, because it's like every minute is like $20,000.
Did you still, despite the difficulties of those years, did you ever waver in your decision to commit to acting in New York City?
Yeah, all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. I did a play in Boston, and this theater, I'm from there, and the theater scene in Boston is really thriving. And it wasn't, when I was living there or growing up there. It existed, but and I'd considered, I was like, oh, should I move up here? I don't, you can be an actor in Chicago and do quite well. LA too, but there's just so many actors in LA.
Yeah.
The Bay Area. Yeah. Yeah. I did have not regrets, but I'd had second thoughts. I was like, is this where I want? You can live in DC and be an actor and work pretty consistently because there's a small pool, but there are these theaters there. So like, why New York?
What kept you here?
I hate change. I don't want to move. I'm a Taurus. I don't want to move. I want to stay. I've been in the same apartment since I moved here. So I don't want to move or change. Part of that's choice. Part of that's lack of choice. Part of that is there's a vibrancy here that I don't think you find anywhere else. Yeah, and that as things progressed for me after the pandemic, I think I questioned it less because some really good things started to happen.
I'd love to talk about that. What happened?
Well, the Brooklyn Center for Theater Research happened, and where do I start?
How did it come about?
So I had a friend who invited me to a play one night, March of 2021. I was like, a play? I was like, what? Really? He's like, yeah, it's in some apartment. I was like, okay. I guess he found out about it on Twitter. And yeah, like packed into this room in Stuytown, in this fabulous Stuytown apartment. Felt like it was just like that, like out of the 40s or whenever they were built. And this play happens, and it's like we're crammed in this living room, and there's like two people sitting in front at a table, and that's the play. And then the playwright is standing at this bookcase with his arm on the bookcase that's like also kind of on the set, and he's, you know, firing off music cues and transitions, and he's like kind of calling transitions, and it was really interesting. I'd never really seen anything. I felt like a salon, but it was a play, but there wasn't much blocking because it was so small and it was like hyper intimate. So I liked what was happening. And I just went up to this guy afterwards because, you know, we were hanging out on a rooftop nearby, and I was like, hey, I like this. I'm an actor. Like, this is interesting. What are you doing? You know, and what's going on? And he's like, yeah, I might have a part for you in this, Civil War play I wrote that we're workshopping up in Maine. That's Matt Gazda. And, you know, I've been in 12 plays of his at this point. And, it's been a very fruitful partnership, you know. I went up to Maine. We worked on this play.
Why Maine? How did that come about?
So our friend Cece, who directed this play, had access to this barn. I'm forgetting the name of it, and she goes up every summer and does this arts barn, kind of new play development lab, and and they like serve us cooked like these beautiful baked goods and coffee and tea and everything, and you know, we just delved into this play, which we later did in 2022, and then slightly before this, you know, I met Matt, and then to answer your question, I almost moved to LA. You know, I met Matt. Nothing was happening in New York at all at this point. It was just like no one knew. I didn't even know that I would act again. I was like, man, I'm like sick of being here. Should I just move to LA? I miss LA. I lived there before. I went to LA for 3 weeks, stayed with a friend, had a great time. Like, I think I'm moving here. It's great. Like, it's just, you know, I have all these friends here. I have such a community here. I don't have much of a community in New York anymore. Everyone's left. And I was excited about doing this. I was excited about making the transition out west again. And the minute I land in New York, I think it was April 29th, 2021. I say to myself, no, I want to stay here and I want to do plays. I don't want to move to LA. A few days later, I have emergency surgery for appendicitis, which makes no sense because, you know, I'm a healthy guy in my 30s, like at that point. And I think it has something to do with, I don't know. Well, I won't say, but I think that's something to do with the vaccine, but that's my personal opinion. And I had a really bad response to surgery. Like I woke up and for weeks, I just felt like I didn't want to live.
Whoa.
Yeah. It was like a PTSD response, like to a medical procedure. It just shocked me. It was like a shock. And I'd never been that depressed in my life. You know, I'm an actor. I struggle with depression, of course.
Yeah.
but it was just, it was terrifying. I mean, it must have been it was a shock thing, you know? And then somebody drops out of a play that Matt's working on. This is just a month before we go up to Maine to work on this other play. But someone drops out of this play that Matt's doing, and he asks me if I want to join. I say, sure. And, you know, once a week for 2-3 months, we would just, at first it was just a Bushwick backyard. No one knew what was happening or what was going to happen. Is New York coming back? Who knows, you know? And we just sat around a fire pit and like read this play and rehearsed this play and started to put it together. And I actually think that kept me alive. Like, you know, I was grateful for the suicide hotline when I felt I had to call in, you know, late May 2021. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't want to be alive if this was life. It was strange. And, which isn't to say like making art is the solution to all of your life's problems. It's naive to imply that, but that's not it. I think it was having a sense of purpose and having a community of people coming around something, a story. And, of course, the play itself is about death. It's about the inevitability of death and these cycles of life and death and rebirth within life. Feelings of death within life, relationships dying, and relationships, it's called ardor. Relationships, burning and then burning out, performed it in late 2021, September. And it was my first time on the stage. It was in a loft, but it was my first time on the stage in a long time. And it brought me back, And no one was doing plays then. I mean, there were maybe a couple plays open on Broadway, but it was a really strange time because the union did a terrible job, like the worst possible job of bringing theater back, or whomever they were consulting with. So there wasn't much happening, and people were scared, and so we were just doing this play in someone's loft in Tribeca, and no mask requirements, no vaccine IDs, and people were craving live story after streaming content for 2 years at that point, almost.
Could you tell right away when you got involved that you were coming back to life in a way, that the PTSD you talked about, the depression you talked about, was subsiding?
Yeah. I was also riding my bike all the way to Mill Basin to see this eccentric chiropractor.
Whoa.
It's like a 30 to 40 minute bike ride in the summer. And he was kind of physically putting me back together. So it was that in tandem with the play and art and community, ultimately really community. But yeah, he the first time I walked into his office, he's like, "Oh, you're in like a reptilian state. You've like, you're in a defense state. You're in like what we call like the reptile state." I think it was something like that, of like defense. And that helped. And, throwing time at it. And just like that winter the following winter was really rough. And then by 2022, I was fine, But yeah, I felt it. I felt something happen.
What are your big takeaways from that experience?
I think no matter how shitty you feel, try to show up for something other than yourself. Try to show up for people or a person or an idea. I think that kind of got me out of my head and out of my kind of self-obsession, even though it was legitimate pain I was in some kind of psychic way. Yeah. And I still take that with me. If I'm too much in my own needs, my own ego, my own vanity, I got to step outside that and look out, who can I reach? Like, who in the audience, they could have done anything tonight. Yeah. Why are they here? They're here. It's significant that they're here. There's 20,000 things you can do on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday night in New York. Yeah.
Talk to me about 2022 and the years forward. What did you do? What happened?
Matt and I continued to work together, and we started working at this spot I dropped out of Dime Square, the play. I'm famous for that. We did this play Ardor, and then he wrote this play Dime Square that was in some ways similar to Ardor. It was sort of the inverse of Ardor. It was like Ardor is about a bunch of theater kids who are not cool. Dime Square is about a bunch of kids who are cool, who may or may not make stuff. They do in the play itself, but two of them do. And I didn't get it. I didn't really get it. And I didn't really know what the process was going to be. And I was in my ego. I mean, I was like, I don't want to do plays in lofts. I want to, I'm doing these catering jobs again. I want to book like real work. I want to book union jobs, now that like Broadway's back and, TV is back, and like, I don't need to do this shit. And I was looking down on it. I wasn't grateful for what the gift that I'd been given, of getting to work on something that was interesting. And it might not have been like $1,200 a week, but it was acting, which most people didn't get to do at that point. So I had to make that mistake, because I think if I'd stayed in Dime Square, I would have soured my relationship with him, because I wasn't in gratitude. I wasn't really thinking about what I could offer. I was only thinking about me and what I could get. And I don't think it would have been good. So it was bittersweet, the success of that play, I'm amazing. I mean, it's, but I had to make that mistake in order to learn my lesson and in order to sort of accept what the universe would give me, and the following year we did 2, maybe 3 more plays of his. 2022, we transitioned. We ended up doing a full production of that play, the Civil War play, All the Mournful Voices, which is one of my favorites of his. And no one knows about it because very few people saw it.
Remind me the name again?
All the Mournful Voices.
Okay.
It's the Easter Sunday after the assassination of Lincoln in a bar outside D.C., and on page 13, in walks the stranger. And in the bar is the barkeep, a judge, and a dying Civil War soldier. And the stranger is, we think, probably Booth on the run. We did this play Messages. And at that point in early 2022, we started to work at this place called Beckett's in Tribeca, which was a dream, really a dream come true. I mean, cell phones weren't really operable in there. The reception was bad. So people weren't really on their phones much. And you could smoke inside. So we would do plays there and people would just smoke inside. Like it was the 80s. I started working with Ryan on a couple of projects at Adult Film. So something was happening, something was happening after that winter of discontent, and people were coming, they were showing up. I don't know who they were. They weren't necessarily theater people, which was interesting. There were theater people and there were non-theater people and there were art people and writers. And it felt like between both of these companies, what we were doing at Beckett's and at other spaces and then what we were doing with Ryan and Adult Film, people were starting to show up and they were seeking something and they were seeking community. And it was the summer and things were happening. It was a good year.
How did the Brooklyn Center come about?
So Beckett's closed or was beginning to close about a year after we started working there. And we also had this space in Greenpoint on Franklin and Green, another loft, but a ground floor loft. And we were doing some plays there, but it was small, and there were no windows. So certain plays worked really well there, certain plays less so. And this kid who was coming, this guy Benji was coming to see some of our plays, and he managed this space over on Huron Street. And one night we were doing a kind of a revival of Arter at this space on Green, and Matt said, "Hey, this guy wants us to come check out his space on Huron. I don't know, it's an option. Go take a look. You've got 20 minutes before we start the show." So I ran in the cold to check out this spot on Huron, and immediately it was like, oh, this is it. This is the next phase of this. Like things are transitioning at Beckett's, things are transitioning into space that we're in on Green Street. Beckett's was just like everybody wanted to do stuff at Beckett's, like parties, readings. It was like getting booked. It was never ours, but it was like at the beginning we were one of the few people who were using it, and then it just started. And then the New York Times article came out about it, and it just was like there was all this publicity, which was great. But we started to want kind of our own thing, I think, where we could be consistently. I started teaching an acting class out of my apartment, kind of inspired by Ryan, what he was doing out of his apartment. I was like, at this point, I was like, oh, I'm back in kind of the groove of acting. Like, I think I might have something to offer. And a bunch of people signed up, so much so that I had to create another block because, they were seeing me. I had some visibility, which I didn't have before the pandemic. I had no visibility, and I think, even though in the moment I'm like, oh, well, I'm not on Broadway. I'm like, I'm auditioning for TV. But it's like, no, but I have visibility. Like, people are seeing my stuff and they want to learn from me. And so it was no real surprise that they wanted to take a class. They're curious, like, oh, I'm curious about acting. Like, I've seen this guy in a couple plays, like several plays. Like, I'm curious. And so I started teaching class out of my house, and then someone approached us about the space on Huron, and then I transitioned the class there. And that was really that was the first sort of thing that landed there. I was like, oh, this is a classroom space where we can also do plays. I hope, it looks like it. And then very quickly, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And, it's the Brooklyn Center for Theater Research. We're not ex-theater company, right? We're interested in, we're inspired by Peter Brook. Where is the research? What is the research? And it's something I'm continuing to push in my class. Yeah, we do plays, we do readings, I think the research is between those events. Like, how can these events link? Things don't need to be so precious because there's not a crazy budget behind them. So there's a looseness to the work that we're doing, and I think we're investigating what is acting in this space with this play, with these circumstances, with this particular structure and style that Matt writes in. But yeah, and then it was March 2023, where we really just officially kicked off.
You co-direct that, right? The center.
Yeah, I mean, there was sort of a core group of us who were sort of more or less admins, I would say. One more, more technically inclined, one more social media, one more sort of educationally, informally. So, but yeah, and there's a sort of core group of us.
I asked because I would love, in whatever detail you want to share, the details of how you've made it work. It's been more than 2 years now that place has been open. I've been to a bunch of shows there. What's important? What have you learned? How financially? How have you made it viable? I'd love for anything you want to share for people that could learn from you.
My answer is I don't know. It just happens. Every month is so different. Every month, sometimes every week is different. I think we just keep going. I think you just have to keep going, and we do it collectively. And people who want to get involved, they just come and get involved, and it really is a group effort. It's not very deep, but it's we're invested in kind of the spiritual craft of doing this. I mean, it really is. It's like there are logistics, there are egos as there are everywhere. I think it's always shifting. I think it tends to kind of move along a show or a couple shows that are happening. It's interesting how the vibe, the look, the aesthetics, the kind of people who come in around a certain event or a certain show that's making its way through a month or 2 or 3, sometimes 4. It's interesting to see kind of the colors take shape, It's chameleon-like, I think, the space, I'm realizing. But it is itself. I mean, it does have a core identity. And some months are tough. Like we don't have there'll be a month. August is always really hard because everybody leaves. You can't sell a show in the end of August.
Yeah.
Even the beginning of August, people are already leaving, trickling out. So how do you bring in revenue? We're constantly trying to figure out how to solve this problem. How do you pay rent and how do you kind of raise enough to kind of give ourselves some spending money? I think that what drives it is the desire and the passion for a legacy. There are people who did this before us, and before them, and part of it is just to prove to ourselves, prove to sort of the theater gods that hey, we can do this. We can do this. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
What was I going to say?
Now that you have this thing running, and I mean, I've looked at your schedule consistently for the last couple of months. There's a ton of production. Going on there almost every single night of the week, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
I know in the past you've, been interested in working on Broadway and doing other things. How is the current work sitting with you? Do you still, I guess this is driving at the concept of success.
Right. Yeah.
In general.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get your thoughts on how you think about that now.
It's definitely evolved for me. I have to be grateful for what I have. And when I do that, it begets gratitude. There are a lot of people who never move to New York, let alone act in plays here, and they should. But I have to remember that the reality I have is in and of itself amazing. And, do I want to be on Broadway and do I want to be a series regular? Yeah, of course. But when I'm oh, wow, look at this. That's pretty cool. Oh, wow. There was this week in August where I was in 3 different plays 3 days in a row. I mean, actors in Berlin get to do that, you know? And there's a lot of time left. I mean, but I'm realizing that idea of success there's only so much I can, the sort of that platonic ideal of like the successful actor. Like, I don't know, like the more I do this, the less I know how that happens. And I think, there are things that I want. But I also have things that I want for myself. And I have I'm getting better and better at like letting go of trying to control the results of what I do. Because some of the most incredible things have happened over the last 3 years, or really over my whole life, but particularly these last 3 years, where it's like I didn't have a plan and I was just showing up, and I didn't have an expectation, and some beautiful memories. And whether you're getting paid $70 a week or $2,400 a week, I've had some of the most enriching moments on stage at 251 Huron Street, where you're really in conversation with an audience. This happened. There was a moment in Zoomers, sort of the second half run of Zoomers. I felt so. Most importantly, what I took from my time in Berlin was like, oh, the theater is a civic space. It is an aesthetic space, but it ultimately serves as civics. Like, particularly this one theater called the Gorky, and it's civics and aesthetics. It's the aesthetics of civics or whatnot. That like, and this is a space where they're doing very politically present work around Israel, Palestine, and Syria. A lot of post-Yugoslavs, so folks from former Yugoslavia, are at this company, and their work feels very much like a conversation. The audience is very engaged. I mean, it follows a dramatic structure, but there's a feeling among the audience and the actors like, oh, we're like engaging with this idea, and we're like agreeing, or we're disagreeing, or we're laughing, or we're reacting in a way that feels democratic. And when we were working on Zoomers, it's this scene that deals with the idea of an age gap relationship between my character Mark and the character that Sophia played, Ella. And acting's always dealing with a problem. And it's what I teach, and it's what I learned in grad school. Like, yeah, we're pursuing what we want, but like in life, God, I'm going like tangent upon a tangent here. Like in life, I don't know what I want in this moment. I'm not really aware of what I want in this moment. It's a helpful tool for acting, but more often than not, like a scene is two people trying to solve a problem, and it kind of liberates you from this idea of like, what is my character's objective and all that, which is of course helpful. But it felt like these are two characters. They're in a relationship together. It's open. They're not sure if they want it to be open. They're navigating a problem, and the audience is just feet away from us. And every single night I could feel them agree, disagree, take her side, switch sides, switch from my side to hers, want us to get together, I could feel them want us to, or break up, whatever. Like, and it was a moment of like civic discourse around this topic that's part of the culture, that there's no right or wrong answer about. And walking off stage, like, that's it. Like, that's what we're after.
You've used the word community multiple times today, and I'd love for you to speak any more you would like about that in relation to the center, or just in general in your experience of contrasting the community you have now versus when you first got here.
Yeah.
However you want to take that, the importance of community in the work you do. I'd love to focus on that because I think that's a really important concept.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the beginning I was kind of begging for a community, and like, right in 2016, 17, along with trying to navigate like living here and get used to it. But the community I have now, I think, I think what let me rephrase. I've come to see that, continuing to return to the sort of touchstone of Berlin. Yeah. Is that you would have people come to a play or an opening, and they wouldn't really necessarily talk about the play afterwards. They would party. There would be an opening, and you would party, and you would stay at the theater until like 4 a.m. Yeah. And I was like, this is interesting. You're not being rushed out of here to go to some shitty overpriced bar. You're like here, and you're meeting people. And it's like, what is going on? And so I think kind of by accident, that's what we've set up at our spot. That I want a play to be like an aesthetic experience. Like I want people to sort of enjoy or be moved by something, and like I said, like the idea of discourse, but to extend that further of that like civic experience, I mean, I don't want to get so dry. Like it should be fun. Like you should come to a play and like enjoy yourself. But like the moment after can also just be like, I want a play to be a locus for people to meet each other and not necessarily talk about how great the acting, or like talk about any. They don't talk about the play. Like meet each other. Have the play be the means of unity among people who might not meet each other otherwise, and we have the roof for that too. And that's how community starts, and that's how people want to meet new people in this city, and they're looking for ways to do that. And the community that's formed around this place, I mean, it continues to grow and extend beyond, that space. I mean, look, you and I are here right now, people are looking for real life experiences. They're at jobs that, where they're behind screens all day, or they're on Zoom, or they're working remotely. And I think people are looking for a community of people in the flesh, in real life.
Yeah. A couple more questions before we close this down.
No, yeah.
One being, and I know you teach...
You edit this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you'll edit some of these like ums and ahs out.
We can.
Yeah.
I would love for you to talk, and whatever detail you would like, about what makes a great actor, in your opinion.
Oh, wow. Immediately, I'm like, I'm not that. I'm not. Don't do what I do. No. What makes a great actor? That's a great question. There are several things, in my opinion. It's funny. Recently, I've been doing yoga every day.
Me too.
Yeah. And not only has it, I've been meeting with someone over WhatsApp across the globe, like 5 to 6, sometimes 6 days a week. And it's changed my psyche, and it's completely changed my acting. And I think the first thing is a physical presence. And I feel free. It's wild. Like, I feel freer in general. And so why wouldn't I feel freer on stage? I don't feel trapped in watching myself as much because I'm on my breath, That's kind of technical. I think what makes a great actor, you have to love language. Like language has to really move you. So much so that you can make it your own. I think that acting Shakespeare is a form of magic because you have to think in poetry. You have to think in verse. And so if it's not Shakespeare, whatever it is, you have to be thinking. Acting is kind of magic. Like you're thinking those thoughts. You're tricking yourself into thinking the thoughts that someone else has written. Yeah. And so I think you have to have like a real deep, ferocious passion for language and rhetoric, kind of. You have to be curious about other people. That's off stage, offset, and on. Because it's really the only way that anything organic happens. I can come and I can prepare or not prepare, and have ideas about how something goes. But, we have to like take in what's happening, with our scene partners. We can build something together, because otherwise I'm just watching someone. And I've been guilty of this, so many times. I struggled with it for a really long time. Like, why am I so stuck in this, like, watching myself? It's because I'm being self-absorbed. Absorb the other person. Yeah. Take them in. What's happening? Have this. That's how the scene builds. That's how the event of the scene will happen. You have to be curious about what other people are doing. And I think, you have to be open to, it's all a conversation between you, the director. I shouldn't say have to, but I think what makes a great actor is someone who's pliable and someone who's curious about someone else's point of view. Oh, you think I should make that choice, or you don't like that choice that I'm making, or you think we should do this instead. Why is that? Okay. I understand. Let's try it. You have to have that. Let's try it. Because otherwise, you're just impeding the process. A lot of acting is just solving problems. And you can either be the problem, which I have been many times, or you can be the solution. You can try and solve, like, okay, we've got this script. We need to make it happen. That's a problem. Like, what's the solution? Oh, this. Here we go. Great. And then it just builds and begets itself. I don't want to say team player. I want to say, like you have to be willing to be part of that family of fellow storytellers. And just love for it. Love for the audience too, You got to take in the audience. What are they? They're laughing at that for some reason tonight. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, receptive. It's such a weird art form. I continue to learn as much about it now as I did 20 years ago. It makes no sense. And that I used to think I would get to a point where like, oh, I understand this now. I get this. I've arrived. No. Which hopefully means I'm getting better.
This is a question I like to close with, which is the advice you would give a friend or your former self about how to do it in New York, how to make it in New York as an artist, what you've learned, what has helped, what you wished you would have done, anything that comes to mind that you think is wise advice about taking an idea about who you might be, a dream you have about who you might become, and doing it like you're doing.
Slow down. Like, listen. I happen to be in the right headspace when I met Matt, and we've had this collaboration for the last 4 years. And I think because of maybe the spiritual work I was doing at that time, and the place that I was in March of 2021, I was able to be open to a conversation and a collaboration and a friendship. And I wonder how many other times that I, turned away from that, literally. I don't know, but I wonder if, I've always been a curious person. But I think, when I was younger, I was just a lot more impatient, and it was about me, Of course, this interview is about me, but but yeah, it was about what I could get. What can I get? Rather than like, what can I offer here? I'm still part of the equation. I'm not being, an unrealistic ascetic here, but what can I offer? Does this person just want to be listened to? Maybe what they have to say is interesting. I can have goals and desires, but like the universe might have something else planned that might be just as interesting. And I don't have really control over what I want. Like that's just out there, right?
Yeah.
So I would say, if I could have, advice to my younger self, just be open and be curious and pursue what's interesting, not what you think you should do. For a really long time, I did that during school and after school. At the same time, like, don't be afraid to rebel and do what could get you in a little bit of trouble, or that your friends would maybe wince at. Because if it's interesting to you, then like that's what's going to get attention. Us staging these plays in lofts, it's not the first time anyone staged a play in a loft. We didn't invent the medium, but at the time, we're like, what are you doing? That's not okay. You can't do that. It's COVID. It's like, well, it's kind of over right now. But, and I'm not saying that we were, breaking, crazy laws, but we were desperate to do something. And we were called to do something. And maybe some people looked down on that or didn't think it was the best idea. But work happens when people, particularly downtown, like work happens when people just go against some sort of way of thinking that they feel that they're expected to be. I always like, oh, I've got to look a certain way for this audition. I've got to, but if I talk too much about this, they're going to think this. Fuck it. The actors I admire the most are those who just did what they liked and then were in some way rewarded for it,
George, thank you.
Yeah, man.
This is great.
Thanks.